Captain Ethan Marlowe had spent the last 8 months hauling cargo across the uncharted regions of the galaxy. Tired, hungry, and craving something familiar, he found himself in an alien spaceport diner, an eclectic mix of scents, sounds, and patrons from species he couldn't even name. The place hummed with life, its dim lighting casting a cozy glow over the mismatched tables and chairs. He didn't care about the decor. All he wanted was a hot meal and a brief respite before heading back to his ship. He approached the counter, manned by a reptilian server whose scales shimmered faintly under the overhead lights. "Rare steak," Ethan said with a tired grin, sliding his payment chip across the counter. The server blinked twice, its vertical pupils narrowing. "Rare steak," it hissed, the translation device garbling the words slightly. "Yeah. Not just rare. Fresh." "Practically mooing," Ethan replied, chuckling to himself. He figured the joke would fall flat, it always did with non-humans, but he was too tired to explain. The server tilted its head, clearly confused. "Fresh. Rare. Understood." It tapped something into its datapad with a clawed finger and disappeared into the back. Ethan slumped into a seat, his gaze wandering around the room. A group of insectoid creatures clicked and chittered over steaming bowls of fluorescent liquid. A gelatinous being absorbed small chunks of food with rhythmic sloshes. The sheer variety of life never ceased to amaze him. Humanity, for all its technological advances, still felt like a small player in the cosmic game. He smirked to himself, thinking about how humans always managed to stand out, no matter where they went. Their food, for one, was a point of pride, and occasional confusion for other species. He remembered a diplomatic dinner where a gelatinous ambassador had nearly dissolved a human chef over a misunderstanding about searing meat. Still, food was universal, a common ground. Or so he thought. Minutes passed. Ethan's stomach growled loudly, earning a few curious glances. He waved apologetically and leaned back, closing his eyes. "Your order, human," the server's voice rasped. Ethan opened his eyes, his grin widening. Finally. But as the dome-covered tray was placed before him, his smile faltered. The server lifted the lid with a flourish, revealing, not a steak, but a young alien girl encased in translucent biogel. She blinked up at him, her wide, iridescent eyes filled with terror. For a moment, Ethan was frozen. He stared at her, then at the server, and back again. What the hell is this?" he demanded, his voice rising. The server looked genuinely puzzled. "Fresh. Rare. As you requested." Ethan's chair scraped loudly as he stood, his mind racing. The girl struggled weakly in the biogel, her gaze pleading. Around the diner, heads turned toward him, some curious, others annoyed by the commotion. "This isn't food!" Ethan exclaimed, his hands balled into fists. The server blinked again, its tone matter-of-fact. "In our culture, fresh means alive. This is a delicacy." Ethan's stomach churned. He glanced at the girl, then at the alien patrons, who seemed more perplexed than horrified. His appetite vanished, replaced by a growing sense of dread. He wasn't just dealing with a misunderstanding, he was facing a moral chasm that felt impossible to bridge. Ethan's breath caught as the weight of the situation settled on him. The girl's wide, iridescent eyes locked onto his, and in that brief moment, a voice resonated in his mind, soft, shaky, and pleading. "Help me!" His stomach twisted. Telepathy. She wasn't just alive, she was fully sentient. He turned back to the server, his voice tight with restrained fury. "You can't seriously expect me to eat her. She's a person." The reptilian server blinked slowly, clearly unimpressed. "She is not of your species. Her kind are cultivated for this purpose. It is a privilege to serve such a delicacy." Ethan's hands pressed against the table to steady himself. Around the room, whispers and murmurs began to ripple as the other patrons noticed the scene. Some stared at him in confusion, others with mild irritation at the disruption. None seemed to share his outrage. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered under his breath. He looked at the girl again, her frail form trembling in the biogel. She wasn't moving much, probably sedated, but her mental voice came through again, faint and desperate. "Please. I don't want to die." Ethan clenched his jaw, his mind racing. He knew he couldn't walk out of this place and leave her behind, but he also knew he couldn't just grab her and run. This wasn't Earth. He was deep in alien territory, where human laws and morals held no sway. He straightened, forcing himself to remain calm. Look, there's been a misunderstanding. I asked for a steak, not this. He gestured toward the girl, keeping his tone measured. Humans don't eat sentient beings. It's against our laws, our morals. The server tilted its head, clearly struggling to understand. You requested fresh and rare. This meets your specifications. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. In human culture, fresh means recently prepared. Rare refers to the cooking level, barely cooked, not alive. The server's expression didn't change, but it emitted a low hiss that might have been confusion or disdain. Your species has peculiar definitions. Regardless, no refunds or substitutions are permitted. The room felt like it was closing in on him. He could feel the weight of dozens of eyes watching, waiting to see how the human would handle this. Ethan exhaled slowly, forcing himself to think. Fine, he said, his tone hardening. Then I want to buy her. The server's pupils narrowed further. Purchase. She is not for sale. She is food. Not to me, she isn't. Ethan leaned forward, lowering his voice. You're telling me you'd rather waste a valuable resource than make a profit? Think about it. You don't want me causing a scene here. Let's work something out. The server hesitated, its gaze flicking toward the back of the diner. It was clear Ethan's suggestion had struck a chord, but the silence that followed made it equally clear this wasn't a simple transaction. Ethan took a step closer, lowering his voice even more. Look, I don't know your customs, but where I come from, we don't enslave or eat people. This girl is sentient, just like me. If you hand her over, no one has to lose face. You get your credits, and I get her freedom. Everyone wins. The server's tail flicked back and forth, betraying its internal conflict. Such actions are irregular, it said finally. I will consult the manager. As the server disappeared into the back, Ethan glanced at the girl again. Her voice came through faintly, a mix of relief and lingering fear. You won't leave me. He shook his head, barely perceptibly. Not a chance, he muttered under his breath. The tension in the diner thickened as the seconds dragged on. Ethan could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Whatever happened next, he knew there was no turning back. The diner's manager arrived with a deliberate, heavy gait, his multi-limbed form towering over Ethan. Each step he took seemed to silence the murmurs around the room, the other patrons shrinking into their seats. His voice was a deep rumble, carrying the authority of someone used to ending disputes quickly. I understand there's an issue with your order, he said, his bulbous eyes fixing on Ethan. Ethan stood his ground, meeting the alien's gaze. There's no issue with my order, he replied evenly. The issue is your interpretation of it. I ordered a meal, not a living, sentient being. The manager's mouth curled into what might have been a smirk. This establishment caters to a diverse clientele. We interpret orders according to our most esteemed traditions. Fresh and rare is the highest standard we offer. Ethan crossed his arms, his voice firm. You didn't interpret anything. You just assumed. Humans don't eat people, and I'm not about to start now. That girl is not food. The manager's smirk disappeared, replaced by a cold, measured stare. You misunderstand the nature of our business, human. This is not an Earth diner. We abide by the customs of countless species, and our reputation is built on honoring those customs without compromise. Ethan could feel the eyes of every patron on him, the air thick with tension. He knew he had to choose his words carefully. Reputation's important, he said, his tone calm but edged with steel. But so is understanding your customers. Humans value life, sentient life, especially. If this gets out, do you think more humans will come here? Or will they avoid this place like the plague? The manager's expression darkened, his limbs twitching subtly. Are you threatening me? No, Ethan said quickly, though his voice carried the weight of his conviction. I'm offering you a way out of this. Let me buy her. You make a profit, and I leave without causing any more trouble. The manager's gaze flicked to the girl, still trapped in the biogel. She whimpered faintly, her mental voice reaching out to Ethan again. I don't want to die. Please. Ethan didn't flinch, holding the manager's gaze. You're a businessman. This is just another transaction. No harm done. The room was silent, the other patrons frozen as they watched the standoff. Finally, the manager let out a low, guttural sigh. Very well, he said, though his tone was anything but agreeable. But the price will not be negotiable. Rare specimens such as this are expensive. Ethan didn't care. He reached for his payment chip, slapping it onto the table. Name your price. The manager rattled off a figure that made Ethan wince internally, but he didn't hesitate. He transferred the credits without so much as a second thought. Done, he said firmly. The manager gestured to the server, who hesitated before stepping forward to release the girl from the biogel. As the viscous material dissolved, she collapsed into Ethan's arms, weak but conscious. Her mental voice came through stronger now, a mix of relief and gratitude. Thank you. Ethan nodded, his grip tightening protectively around her. You're safe now, he muttered. But as he turned to leave, the manager's voice stopped him cold. Be warned, human. Not all in this galaxy share your peculiar morality. If you interfere with such traditions again, the consequences may not be so easily resolved. Ethan glanced back, his eyes hard. Then I guess I'll have to keep reminding them what it means to be human. Without another word, he carried the girl out of the diner, every step heavy with the weight of what had just transpired. The eyes of the patrons followed him to the door, the silence in the room a testament to the mark he had left. Ethan stepped out into the cool metallic twilight of the spaceport, the girl cradled carefully in his arms. Her frail body trembled against him, her iridescent skin glistening faintly in the dim light. She was lighter than he'd expected, her form barely more substantial than the biogel she'd been trapped in. Where are you taking me? Her voice echoed in his mind, still tentative but laced with hope. Somewhere safe, Ethan said, glancing around to ensure no one was following them. The spaceport was still bustling, but the atmosphere felt heavier, as though the universe itself had shifted after what had just happened. We'll get you cleaned up, fed, and figure out where you're from. The girl's large, luminescent eyes blinked up at him, confusion mixing with gratitude. You don't even know me. Why would you help? Ethan paused mid-step, looking down at her. Because someone has to, he said simply. And right now, that someone's me. She didn't respond, but he felt a flicker of warmth in the back of his mind, like an unspoken thank you. As they approached his ship, the Starbreaker, Ethan's thoughts raced. He didn't recognize her species, and that meant her people were either rare, isolated, or worse, enslaved. He had heard whispers about certain species being trafficked across the galaxy, but this was the first time he'd seen it firsthand. The realization only hardened his resolve. The ramp to his ship lowered with a hiss, and he stepped inside, the familiar hum of the systems bringing a small measure of comfort. He set the girl down gently on a padded bench in the medbay, grabbing a scanner to check her vitals. You're lucky, he said after a moment, scanning the results. Whatever they used to sedate you is wearing off, and you don't seem to have any permanent damage. But you're going to need rest. She looked around the medbay with wide eyes, clearly unused to such surroundings. You're different from the others, she said, her voice hesitant but curious. Ethan smiled faintly. Humans usually are. We don't always get it right, but when it comes to protecting life, we don't back down. Her eyes softened, and for the first time, she smiled, small, fleeting, but real. Once she was stable, Ethan moved to the cockpit, firing up the ship systems. He pulled up a map of nearby sectors, searching for any information on her species. Nothing came up, confirming his worst fears. Whoever her people were, they weren't just rare, they were off the grid entirely. What's your name? He asked over his shoulder. She hesitated, as though the concept was foreign to her. Lyra, she finally said, the name echoing softly in his mind. Well, Lyra, Ethan said, locking in a course. We're going to figure this out. First, we'll find out where you came from. If your people are still out there, we'll get you back to them. And if they're not... He paused, his voice hardening. Then we'll make sure the ones responsible for this never do it again. Her voice was stronger now, more certain. You mean that? Every word, Ethan replied. As the Starbreaker lifted off, Ethan glanced out the viewport at the endless expanse of stars. The galaxy was vast and dangerous, But it was also full of opportunities to do the right thing. Lyra's voice echoed in his mind one last time, filled with quiet determination. Maybe humans aren't as small as they think they are. Ethan smirked, his hands steady on the controls. No, we're not. And the galaxy's going to learn that, one way or another. With a burst of light, the ship jumped into hyperspace, leaving the chaos of the spaceport behind and heading toward an uncertain but hopeful future.